Asithathe leli thuba sikubingelele ekhaya sibonge nokuthi uthathe ithuba ukuthi uthamele lolu hlelo. I am Apostle Musa Khwela. I am from Jesus Restores. I thought I should take a moment in order for me to reflect and make a contribution to the recent political developments in our country. I think number one, I want to indicate ukuthi uNkulunkulu loves this country. God loves the people of this country, and uNkulunkulu unohlelo analo. He has a plan for this country because there's a lot of things that God is gonna do ezihambisana nokuthi South Africa kufuneke ishintshe ibe okuthize, so that it is able to fulfill that calling in God. And so, kuyiqiniso ukuthi uNkulunkulu has great interest in this country in terms of what is happening. I also want to say, and uNkulunkulu is going to continue to guide this country. Sometimes when God intervenes, akubi clear ukuthi it is God intervening and it is God shepherding time and history. I will be clear because his interventions are not easy to scrutinize, they're not easy to decipher. But I am of the view that uNkulunkulu is intent on fixing this country. We must understand ukuthi bakhona abangathandi ukuthi South Africa develop into a certain version of itself where the history it has been true, which is the history of colonialism and the history of apartheid, is no longer traceable. There are those who would rather have the status quo continue and bamelane nalo lonke ushintsho olungaba possible. But I can tell you ukuthi bazohluleka because it is the will of God that this country should change and that South Africa's people be fully liberated. And so so the last elections are part of God's strategic intervention. uNkulunkulu usamile kwi-version of South Africa where South Africa is truly just, and it is a South Africa that is able to assist all its citizens ukuthi babe inoma yini yena uNkulunkulu ababizele kuyona, so that they are able to walk in their potentials fully. But again, sise lapho, it is important to indicate ukuthi uma sisebenzisa ihlo le history to look at what has happened, South Africa is only 30 years old. So using a historical perspective to evaluate things and to measure progress, 30 years is like in history time, it's like, well, one day. So it's not that long of a time. But I understand the frustration that comes with being part of that 30 years. It really does feel like a long time. But South Africa is an infant democracy. It is a new country. And South Africa is still in the infancy of many processes. It is still building a democratic culture. It is still trying to figure out how we can better be, bring various communities to a place of cohesion. We are still trying to figure out the role of black people, because for a long time, the South Africa that existed didn't have a role for black people, particularly in governance. It didn't have a role for black people. And we must be very careful ukuthi sivume ukuthi kulo 30 years, which is just a fraction of time, kube ukuthi we allow ourselves to lose focus, drop the ball, be distracted. What I mean by that is we must not engage in a politics that divides us. We must always seek to bring, to build consensus amongst ourselves. Because in division there is no strength. And when we develop a politics of hate and a politics where we undermine one another, then you can rest assured it will take longer to transform South Africa. Because South Africa can't be transformed by a fraction of people. We will have to really work hard to find one another so that we give impetus to the speed and pace of change that must occur in this country. Listen, I'm not saying these things easily as if everyone must then be at the table. Obviously, not everyone is going to be at the table. Some of the people will make sure that even the sitting in the table is not possible, so that we never hear one another. We never have time to listen to one another. We are never able to sit down as one nation. All of those things are still under construction, by the way. We have not as yet become one nation. South Africa is a nation of nations. It's a country with many nations, people of various interests. We have not been able to reconcile our interests. Now that is why, having come to this particular stalemate in terms of the last results of the May 29th elections, having come to a place where no single party has the majority, is not necessarily a crisis, because it then opens up a door where we must sit down and engage with one another and see where we agree and where we don't agree, and engage further so that we are able to at least agree on the type of South Africa we would like to build. For now, the 30 years has not been used as effectively as it should have been, because the approach to governing was not that consultative. And again, the pace of change slowed down as the years had gone by. So there was a slowing down of the pace of transformation, and it is almost stalling right now. And we must then begin to say, how can we revitalize the pace of transformation, and which are the critical areas to transform? Remember, I said in the beginning, God is intent on changing this country, and nothing is going to dissuade God otherwise. Nothing is going to change God's perspective of this. And so South Africa is going to have to continue at it until we find the right formula that works for South Africa, and the formula that is able to carry us forward. I don't think we have found that formula yet. And it is incumbent upon each and every leader, political leader in this country, to say, what can I do? What would be my contribution in making sure that this country finds the formula of development that is inclusive, a formula of development and a formula of governance that is inclusive? I mean, when I say that, for now, our people only get engaged on issues of governance when it is time for elections. When we are passing bills and passing laws, our people are not sufficiently consulted. I'm not saying legislatures and the National Assembly doesn't open up opportunities for people to come, and they do, but our people lack the organizational capacity to do that. And again, they lack the financial capacity to employ someone to do that on their behalf. Unlike our white brothers, who are actually happy to contribute whenever there is an opportunity to do so, because they have the capacity organizationally. They also have the capacity financially to contribute to legislations. And that is why I'm of the view that presently our approach to legislating is actually not in sync with where our people are. We sometimes we legislate as if we are legislating for a European Western democracy. South Africa is an infant democracy that has big issues to deal with. For instance, we must still structurally transform our economy. When we say that, what we mean is our economy is still basically structured the way it was before 1994. It still benefits those who used to benefit before 1994. It still responds to their desires and wishes as it used to. And so when we say it must then be transformed structurally, we mean it must be able to accommodate the township economy. The reason why township economies never take off is because the economy is not structured in a way that accommodates any productivity from the township. The only thing the economy can accept from the township is labor, cheap labor, nothing more than that. And so we must yet figure out how we can then transform the economy structurally so that it is able to be responsive to the demands, needs of the people and the productivity, the entrepreneurship of the people from all walks of life. South Africa's economy is essentially urban. It runs in urban places. I mean, South Africa is not a country that is totally urban. South Africa is also mostly rural. And to have an urban economy disrupts and distorts a lot of processes. Number one, people must move from rural areas to urban places in order to participate in the economy. So that is not the type of economy we would like to see in South Africa. South Africa's economy must be able to operate in every place. It must be responsive to every sector of society. Now, that was just one example of the many things that still need to be done in order to get South Africa to where it should be. Now, another thing is just to extend my commentary on issues of legislating and all that. I'm not sure if our laws recognize the diversity and the richness that is to be found in the South African experience. South Africa is diverse, and that must be reflected in the law. But over and over, when we legislate in a manner that does not recognize South Africa's diversity. Let me make an example so that you understand. We inherited a colonial state. When I say a colonial state, I simply mean it was a state built in order to complement colonial powers, Britain, the North. And so we inherited that state with its institutions and everything. And then we just put new personnel in place. That didn't change a lot of things. This is not to say, institutionally speaking, there has not been transformation. Well, there has, but it has been quite peripheral. It's at the edges. It's not fundamental. It's not the levels of transformation that are required to put South Africa on a solid footing for the orientation it must have, both institutionally and legally. We have not yet accommodated Africa's perspective to issues of governance, to legislating. Someday we will go deeper to these issues. But for now, these are the challenges that South Africa is having to grapple with. I am happy that at 30 years, South Africa has had to face what it is facing in terms of no single party having a majority. I'm quite happy with that development because it then forces us to reassess. It forces us to reevaluate and to review. Now, in terms of how the review process must then be undertaken, my contribution would be we must take this moment as a second chance to really transform South Africa. So this is 1994 2.0. Now, this is a very serious moment because God is getting us back into the table. And at the table now will be all of us, because all of us are now participating from a different framework. In other words, it's not the apartheid government that is setting the ball rolling. We now have a democratic framework in place, which we can then use as a basis of coordinating ourselves. We have very active civil society organizations, even though, as indicated before, there's still very limited players who are able to represent the historically disenfranchised, the historically disadvantaged. Very few players are able to do that. Most players would be organizations that represent narrow interests. Now, the point I want to make when I say, I think we have 1994 all over again. We've been given a chance to get it right. We've been given a chance to bring to the table serious matters once again. How far can we take transformation? I understand some sectors look like they've transformed. For instance, the public service, most senior managers and middle managers are black. Well, in terms of personnel and faces, the public service does look like it has transformed. But that's the only sector that government could transform, because government had direct oversight over the public sector. But the economy has not transformed. And the way South Africa develops partially has not transformed. Our people still live in segregated areas. They still live in separate areas. Mostly well-to-do, mostly white people still live in the suburbs. And then mostly black and poor people still live in the townships and in the edges of towns and cities and in rural spaces. We still need to transform that, but the only way to transform that is to actually transform the economy so that the economy is able to be inclusive, is able to benefit everyone, so that everyone can then make their own decisions of where they would like to reside and what type of life they would like to live. So I'm saying there are civil society organizations that are going to be part of this second phase of reconfiguring South Africa. You have a lot of political parties that have come into the scene. You have the African National Congress, you have the Democratic Alliance, you have Mkhonto weSizwe Party, you have the Economic Freedom Fighters, and many other parties. And it is important that each and every voice be heard, because one of the things that I keep hearing is how dismissive people tend to be of certain views, of other views. How the media tends to actually ridicule certain perspectives. Actually, these are perspectives from political parties that have been voted into parliament by South Africans. So no one has a right to ridicule their perspective, because South Africa is not gonna be reconfigured when just the few are at the table. Now that is why there must then be an opportunity to engage each other again, as if we were still building up to 1994. This is how serious this moment is. The engagements must take that level of seriousness. And we must pray that such a door will open, so that you don't have certain political parties just slugging it out in parliament and that's it. And then you have certain coalition or factions just voting a certain agenda through without being sensitive to what other parties are saying. I think if we do that, we shall have missed the moment that has been presented to us. This is an opportune time to reboot, to restart, to reconfigure South Africa. I sense that is what the Lord, that is why the Lord has brought us to this moment. If we miss this moment, we shall have missed a very critical moment to the future of South Africa. South Africa must reconfigure. South Africa as presently configured is not working for all of us. It is not working for the poor. South Africa's people have given this economy 30 years to change their lives. And this economy has failed to do so. And again, I hear people emphasize the matter of job creation. Listen, job creation is good, but you don't transform a country just through job creation. Job creation is good for salaries. People get to earn salaries and they get to put food on the table. But we must transform beyond a job opportunity. We must open genuinely serious economic opportunities for our people so that there is then a redistribution of wealth. Job opportunities don't necessarily redistribute wealth because whosoever owns the company keeps the bulk of the profits. So whatever salaries and wages he shares with the workers, it's just a fraction of what they would have made. And therefore, you don't transform an economy, the patterns of ownership. You don't transform the patterns of ownership through job creation. We must have a conversation that goes beyond job creation. We have failed to coalesce, to come to a place of being cohesive. We have failed to get South Africa to a point of social cohesion because we are still fundamentally divided. We are still fundamentally segregated. It may not be so officially and politically speaking, but it is still so in every other way. Another thing that the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me about is the fact that He has put a burden upon a lot of people. So a lot of people have begun to be concerned about South Africa, about the state. They've begun to really say, what can I do to really contribute to the transformation of this country? So the Spirit of the Lord said to me, He has begun to put that type of burden upon a lot of people. And I want to appeal to that breed of people, to that class of people who have felt a stirring from God, not just to pray for our country, but to stand up and do something. And the Spirit of the Lord spoke to me about a generation whose ethics are different. A generation that is willing to carry the burden of transforming South Africa. The Spirit of the Lord spoke to me about an army of people who are prepared to walk the walk and be agents of change wherever they may be in making sure that there's an acceleration to the transformation agenda that South Africa must undertake. There is an army of people, and I'm inviting you that, listen, let's organize ourselves. I'm going to be hosting a conference in August dedicated to the issue of governance. We shall be praying for governance. We shall be talking to issues of governance. We'll spend the whole day praying and talking about these issues. And I'm inviting you, whichever section of public service you may be involved in, whether you are a nurse, whether you are a teacher, a union leader, whether you are a supervisor at work, a senior manager, I'm inviting you. There's a conversation we must have about the future of this country. There's a strategizing we must do about the future of this country. And I'm inviting you to join me. I'm going to give you the date. And so I want you, to keep checking our page for this announcement. I'm going to give you the date in August. We always host our conference, our annual conference in August. We're going to have the whole day dedicated to praying for this country, speaking about what still needs to happen in terms of the transformation agenda for this country to get where it should be. The Spirit of the Lord said there's a lot of technocrats that the Spirit is going to raise. And I like this. He's going to raise these people and He's going to send them to government. These people are going to be serving in government and they're going to be highly capable. They're going to be highly ethical. It's a new breed of managers. It's a new breed of technocrats. That's what the word of the Lord said to me. The Lord said He is at work. He is putting things together for this country to work. And there's an army of ethical people who are willing to be the hand of God that fast tracks the transformation that must come upon South Africa. This time, the Lord is not going to use politicians alone. The Lord has mobilized a lot of people. Oh yeah. The Lord has mobilized a lot of people who are going to rise up and play their role. This country will be what God intends for it to be. That is the will of the Lord. No one can stop what God is about to do. There's gonna be a revival of governance, a revival of leadership. I'm just saying what I hear from the Spirit. There's gonna be such a richness of leadership that arises. There's gonna be a crop of leaders that arises. Not just a couple. There's gonna be a company of them. And deeply ingrained in their hearts is a South Africa that is prosperous, that is just, a South Africa that is inclusive, and a South Africa that works for all. Thank you very much for having joined me. And I hope you keep joining me, and I hope you invite others, and I hope you share this video so that as many people as possible are able to hear this message. South Africa must transform. That is the will of the Lord. And the Lord will ensure that South Africa does transform. No one is going to be able to resist the change that God wants to implement in this country. Nobody is going to be able to resist that change. And God is going to allow certain people. I had an interview recently in one of the radio stations just before the 29th of May elections. And I understood by the Spirit of the Lord that God was going to cause his people to vote in separate ways. And I indicated in this interview as such that the people of God were going to vote into, they're going to be spread, their votes were going to be spread around, because that's the will of God. Because God wanted to get us to this place where we are able to talk to one another again, where we are not dismissive of one another, where we are not so hateful of one another. South Africa must transform. South Africa must reflect in its laws and in its patterns of economic activity and productivity. It must reflect its diversity, the diversity of its people. That is the will of God. There is no two ways about it. We're going to be doing a lot of these videos, so keep watching, keep checking the page, because there's a lot that the Lord is going to be talking to us pertaining to issues of governance and transformation. The Lord bless you. Thank you very much for having joined us. Please share the video as widely as possible. The Lord bless you. See you soon.